Your mind runs the same conversations on repeat. You replay what you said, rehearse what you'll say, analyze what it means. The exhaustion isn't from living, it's from thinking about living. This stops today. 8 Buddhist stories will show you exactly where your mind traps you and how to step free. Not through positive thinking or mental tricks, through recognition. You'll meet a poor man who carried priceless treasure for years without knowing it was sewn into his robe. A student everyone called hopeless who became a master through one simple practice. A hare who faced certain death with impossible calm and transformed fate itself. These aren't metaphors for self-improvement. They're mirrors showing what happens when people stop fighting their minds and see clearly. Each story reveals one way overthinking blocks peace, evaluating your worth endlessly, rehearsing confrontations that never happen, analyzing your capacity, instead of simply practicing, trying to control outcomes beyond your reach, waiting for perfect timing, calculating every risk, treating life as burden, doubting what you already are. Wherever you are right now, commuting home, lying awake, seeking refuge from the noise, settle in. This journey takes 3 hours. No rushing, no forcing. By the end, you won't have learned how to think better. You'll have recognized what exists before all thinking begins. The first story starts with a man searching desperately for something he's already carrying. You'll recognize him immediately. The poor man had been wandering for years, through cities and villages, along dusty roads and crowded marketplaces, always searching for the life he deserved. He'd left home young with dreams of prosperity. Somewhere beyond the next hill, he was certain, fortune waited. But the years had worn him down, like water smoothing stone. Work came and went, hauling grain, mending walls, odd jobs that paid barely enough for rice and shelter. He slept in doorways when he couldn't afford rooms. Each dawn he stood with other desperate men at market squares, hoping merchants would choose him for the day's labor. They usually didn't. Too old, too worn, too visibly defeated. On good days, he earned enough to eat. On bad days, he watched others eat and told himself tomorrow would be different. But hunger wasn't the worst part. What haunted him was the constant measuring. He'd see men his age dressed in fine clothes, conducting business, speaking with authority. He'd wonder what invisible quality they possessed that he lacked. Better breeding, sharper minds, some essential worthiness that marked them for success while leaving him permanently outside. The comparison never stopped. If only I had education. If only I'd been born into the right family. If only I was clever enough to spot opportunities, brave enough to seize them, worthy enough to matter. Each thought was a stone added to the weight he carried. This is the exhaustion, you know, not the tiredness of physical work, but the weariness of evaluating yourself constantly. Am I smart enough for this position? Attractive enough to be chosen? Successful enough to justify my existence? The questions multiply faster than answers arrive. One evening, exhausted and hungry, the poor man's wandering brought him to a prosperous city. He remembered that an old friend lived here, someone from his village who'd left years ago and succeeded beyond imagination. He found the house easily, large, well-maintained, announcing its owner's status before you knocked. Shame held him at the gate, the humiliation of appearing in rags before someone who'd climbed while he'd fallen felt unbearable. But night was coming, and he had nowhere else to go. He knocked. The wealthy friend opened the door himself. His face transformed instantly. Genuine joy. No hesitation. No judgment. "You're here," he said, pulling the poor man inside before he could apologize for his appearance. He ordered servants to prepare a feast. Not a modest meal, but a celebration. He insisted his old companion take the place of honor at the table. They ate together like they had as boys, laughing, sharing memories, the years of separation, dissolving. The poor man felt something he hadn't experienced in so long he'd almost forgotten the sensation. Belonging, being seen as himself, not measured against anyone else. Wine flowed freely. The warmth of the room, the fullness of his belly, the safety of being among friends, it all combined into overwhelming relief. His eyes grew heavy mid-sentence. The wealthy friend noticed and smiled gently. "Rest," he said. "Stay as long as you need." The poor man fell asleep right there at the table, more peaceful than he'd been in years. The wealthy friend sat watching his companion sleep. He saw the exhaustion carved into his face, the defeat settling into his shoulders, the weight of years spent believing himself worthless. Deep compassion rose in him. He knew his friend would leave in the morning. Pride wouldn't allow accepting direct charity. He'd return to the wandering that was slowly killing him, convinced he had nothing, was nothing, would never be anything. So the wealthy friend did something remarkable. He went to his treasury and selected a jewel of extraordinary value, a stone that could sustain a person comfortably for life, that could transform poverty into security with a single sale. Quietly, carefully, he returned to where his friend slept. He took out a needle and thread. He sewed the priceless jewel deep into the hem of his friend's robe, hidden in the lining where it wouldn't be noticed, but would travel with him everywhere. He worked slowly, making sure the stitching was secure. The jewel settled into the fabric, invisible but present, a fortune concealed in plain sight. The wealthy friend didn't wake him to explain, didn't attach conditions or demand gratitude. He simply gave, secretly, and let his friend sleep. This act mirrors a teaching from the Lotus Sutra, one of Buddhism's most important texts. The jewel represents what's called Buddha nature, the inherent capacity for awakening that exists in all beings. Not something you earn through achievement, not something you develop through years of practice. Something already present, complete, waiting to be recognized. Morning came too quickly. The poor man woke, embarrassed by falling asleep at the table, overwhelmed by his friend's generosity. He thanked him profusely and prepared to leave. The wealthy friend almost told him about the jewel. The words formed in his mouth. "Wait, before you go, there's something sewn into your robe." But he hesitated. Some gifts can't be explained. Some truths must be discovered, not delivered. So he embraced his friend, wished him well, and watched him walk away, wearing a fortune he didn't know he carried. The poor man returned to wandering, the same dusty roads, the same desperate search for work, the same gnawing sense of inadequacy. Years passed, not months, years. He moved from city to city, always searching for the opportunity that would finally prove his worth. He took whatever work he could find, saved what little he could, dreamed of the day he'd have enough to matter. The robe grew threadbare. He patched it when it tore, washed it in rivers, wore it through seasons of heat and cold. It was all he had. The jewel remained hidden in the hem, carried through 100 cities, present during 1,000 moments of despair. There, while he stood at market squares waiting to be chosen. There, while he slept in doorways and told himself he was worthless. He never noticed the slight weight at the bottom of his robe, never wondered about the careful stitching in the lining, never suspected that what he desperately sought was sewn into the very garment he wore against his skin. The irony became his daily reality. He'd stand begging for work while carrying wealth that exceeded what most merchants possessed. He'd count coins carefully, calculating whether he had enough for both food and shelter, while a fortune rested against his leg. He'd watch successful men pass by and wonder what made them worthy, never realizing he carried more value than they could see. The measuring intensified over time. Each year, without success, confirmed his suspicions about himself. He'd replay his life, searching for the moment he'd failed, the choice that had doomed him to this existence. At night, lying on hard ground, he'd create elaborate explanations for his poverty. Bad luck, poor timing, the unfairness of a world that rewarded the wrong people. Sometimes he blamed himself completely. Sometimes he blamed everyone else. The thinking never brought relief, but he couldn't stop. One day, by chance, his wandering brought him back to the same prosperous city. He'd aged visibly, more grey in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, the shuffling gait of someone who'd walked too far for too long. He stood in the marketplace, hoping for work, when a hand gripped his shoulder. He turned to see his wealthy friend, staring at him in disbelief. "You're still living like this?" the wealthy friend said, his voice breaking. "After all these years, you're still wandering in poverty?" The poor man felt shame flood through him. To be seen again in this state, to have failed so completely, to prove himself as worthless as he'd always suspected. "I've tried," he said quietly. I've worked, I've searched, but I don't have what it takes. The wealthy friend's expression shifted from shock to something between laughter and tears. Don't have what it takes? He repeated. You've had everything you needed all along. He grabbed the poor man's robe, running his hands along the hem until he found the hidden stitching. That night you stayed with me years ago. Do you remember? The poor man nodded, confused. While you slept, I sewed a priceless jewel into your robe. Right here. His fingers found the lump in the fabric. You've been carrying wealth beyond measure this entire time. The poor man stared as his friend carefully unpicked the stitches. Thread by thread, the hidden pocket opened. His friend reached inside and pulled out the jewel. It caught the sunlight, scattering colors across both their faces. The poor man had never seen anything so beautiful, so valuable, so impossible. This has been with you through everything, his friend said gently. Every city you walked through, every night you slept in doorways, every moment you thought yourself worthless, you were carrying this. The poor man took the jewel in trembling hands. The weight felt familiar somehow, like something his body had known even while his mind remained ignorant. He thought of all the years, the calculations, the comparisons, the endless measuring of his inadequacy. All of it happening while this jewel rested against his skin, patient and present, waiting to be seen. He hadn't been poor at all, not for years. He'd simply been unable to see what he already possessed. This parable appears in the 8th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha told it to reveal something crucial about how we fundamentally misunderstand ourselves. The jewel represents Buddha nature, the inherent capacity for awakening that exists in all beings, not as potential to develop someday, not as a reward for years of self-improvement, but right now, complete, present, sewn into your being. The poor man spent years measuring himself against others, calculating his value, determining his inadequacy. Every comparison confirmed what he already believed, that he lacked something essential. But the jewel was always there. The measuring didn't create worth or destroy it. The endless evaluation changed nothing about what he actually possessed. The overthinking starts when we forget this. We measure ourselves constantly, assuming the answer might be that we're not enough. Think about your own measuring system. How much mental energy goes into evaluating whether you're good enough at your job, attractive enough to be chosen, successful enough to justify your existence? The calculations happen automatically, constantly, consuming resources you could use for living. And what has all that measuring achieved? Has the constant evaluation finally settled the question of your worth? Or does each answer require another question, each achievement demand another accomplishment to confirm it? The validation never quite settles it. Each success requires another success. The measuring never ends because it's addressing the wrong problem. You don't need to earn worth through achievement. You need to recognize the jewel you're already carrying. The poor man's jewel didn't appear when he discovered it. It had been there the entire time, present during his worst moments of self-doubt, there, while he stood convinced of his worthlessness, sewn into his robe, while he searched desperately for external validation. The recognition changed everything while changing nothing. The jewel was identical before and after discovery. What shifted was his ability to see what had always been true. The Buddha taught this not as positive thinking, but as direct observation. You can verify it yourself. What happens when you stop evaluating for just this moment? Not to think better thoughts about yourself, but to rest from the measuring entirely. There's often a sensation of relief, like setting down a weight you didn't realize you were holding. The relief doesn't come from reaching a positive conclusion about yourself. It comes from temporarily stopping the evaluation process. That relief points to something important. The measuring itself is the burden, not the conclusions it reaches. The jewel is there whether you search for it or not. The searching doesn't create it. The recognition doesn't add anything. It simply reveals what already is. The Lotus Sutra teaches that all beings possess this Buddha nature, not some beings, not the spiritually advanced, not those who've meditated for decades. All beings, you included. Right now, regardless of how you feel about yourself, regardless of how your life looks from the outside, regardless of whether you've succeeded or failed, by any measure, the capacity for awakening exists in you. Complete, present, waiting only for recognition. The poor man stood in that marketplace, holding a jewel that had traveled with him for years. All the poverty, all the shame, all the measuring, none of it had touched the jewel's value. Your worth is like that jewel, independent of circumstances, untouched by comparison, complete regardless of recognition. The question isn't whether you have it. The question is whether you can stop measuring long enough to see it. What would it feel like to set down the evaluation just for this moment? Not to conclude you're worthy, but to rest from asking the question entirely. The jewel doesn't need your belief to exist. It was there before you questioned yourself. It remains after you stop. The poor man walked away from that marketplace wealthy, not because the jewel suddenly appeared, but because he finally saw what had been there all along. The same recognition waits for you. But seeing inherent worth doesn't end all struggle. In the next clearing, a different test appears. Someone who provokes you deliberately, repeatedly, testing whether patience is weakness or wisdom. A buffalo stands still while a monkey pulls his ears, and what looks like passivity reveals itself as strength. The buffalo felt the monkey land on his back again. Lightweight, familiar by now, almost routine. This had been going on for weeks. Every day the same pattern. the monkey would swing down from the trees, land on the buffalo's broad back, and begin his harassment. Pulling ears, tugging tail, yanking tufts of hair, eventually escalating to complete disrespect, relieving himself on the buffalo's head while chattering mockingly. The buffalo could end this instantly. One toss of his massive head would send the monkey flying. Those sharp horns could gore. Those powerful hooves could trample. But he never did. Not because he couldn't, because he chose not to. This distinction between inability and choice sits at the heart of the Mahisa Jataka, the 278th story in the Pali Canon's ancient collection. The Buddha told this to his monks to teach about patience, one of the 10 perfections that those seeking awakening cultivate. Not the patience of gritted teeth and suppressed rage, the patience that comes from seeing clearly. Inside the buffalo's mind, the analysis ran constantly. He felt every pull, every indignity, every violation. The temptation to react was absolutely real. He could end this. Swift movement, problem solved, lesson delivered. The monkey would learn about consequences. The harassment would stop. But then deeper thought emerged. This monkey is ignorant. He doesn't understand what he's doing or who he's doing it to. He sees my patience as weakness, my calm as inability to respond. Why should I, a noble being, lower myself to his level? Why should I let his ignorance dictate my actions? He can pull my ears all day. It doesn't diminish me unless I choose to let it. This is the teaching the buffalo understood. Reacting to every provocation doesn't demonstrate strength. It demonstrates that others control you. If the monkey could make him angry by pulling his tail, then a small creature controlled a massive one. If harassment could force a response, then the harasser held the power. True strength meant remaining unmoved, not through suppression, but through clarity. You know this pattern from your own life. Someone at work undermines you in a meeting. 30 seconds of their comments. 3 hours of you replaying it, crafting responses, imagining confrontations. They said their piece and moved on. You're still fighting them in your head, during dinner, during your commute, before sleep. Who's really being controlled? The buffalo grazed peacefully while the monkey harassed him. Days passed this way. The monkey's behavior became predictable, almost boring. But something interesting happened to the monkey. The complete lack of response confused him. He'd expected anger, resistance, some acknowledgement of his power, to annoy. The silence was worse than rage would have been. So he escalated, pulled harder, insulted louder, violated more egregiously. Still nothing. The buffalo continued his peaceful routine, as if the monkey didn't exist. This non-reaction infuriated the monkey more than any retaliation could have. The monkey began to believe his own interpretation. If the buffalo won't defend himself, the monkey reasoned, then clearly he can't. Clearly he's weak, powerless, too dull to recognize disrespect. The monkey grew bold, reckless, confident in his immunity. One afternoon, he spotted another buffalo grazing alone near the forest edge. This one looked similar, large, powerful, seemingly calm. The monkey had grown so confident that he didn't pause to consider differences. A buffalo is a buffalo, he thought. They're all the same. Big, slow, too stupid to fight back. He swung down from the trees and landed on this new buffalo's back with casual arrogance, grabbed the ears and pulled hard, chattering insults, waiting for the familiar non-reaction. This buffalo was different. This one had no patience developed through wisdom, no understanding of forbearance, no clarity about when reaction serves and when it doesn't. This one was simply ill-tempered, quick to rage, and had been waiting his entire life for an excuse to use his horns. The buffalo's head snapped back violently. The monkey flew through the air, tumbling, crashing into a tree trunk with sickening force. Before he could recover, the buffalo charged. Those massive hooves came down once, twice, crushing. The horns followed, swift and merciless. The monkey died instantly. His last moment of consciousness, if there was any thought at all, might have been pure confusion. How could this buffalo be so different from the other? They looked the same, moved the same, grazed in the same forest. But one had chosen patience through understanding. The other had chosen rage. The monkey had mistaken the first buffalo's choice for incapacity, never understanding that patience was power, not weakness. When the Buddha finished telling this story, he revealed the teaching embedded in it. In that past life, I was the patient buffalo, he said, the one who endured harassment without retaliation, who chose nobility over reaction. This matters. The Buddha himself, in a past existence before enlightenment, practiced patience so complete that it allowed continuous disrespect without anger. Patience appears in Buddhism as one of the 10 perfections, qualities those seeking awakening develop over many lifetimes. The Pali word is khanti, often translated as patience, forbearance, or endurance. But it's not passive acceptance of abuse. It's the strength to not react from anger when reaction would cause more suffering. Think about the mental energy you spend on difficult people. The colleague who dismisses your ideas. The family member who makes passive-aggressive comments. The neighbor who violates boundaries repeatedly. The actual interactions might be brief. 5 minutes in a meeting. 10 minutes at a family dinner. A 30-second exchange at the property line. But the mental replay goes for hours. You craft the perfect response you didn't say, You imagine the confrontation where you finally put them in their place. You rehearse variations. What you'll do if they try it again. How you'll make them see how wrong they are. The difficult person occupies your mind completely. They're not even present, but they're consuming your mental space, controlling your emotional state, directing your thoughts. You are the buffalo being harassed, but most of the harassment is happening in your own mind. The patient buffalo understood something you can test yourself. The monkey's actions revealed the monkey's nature, nothing about the buffalo. Pulling ears didn't make the buffalo less noble. The disrespect said everything about the disrespectful one and nothing about the one being disrespected. Reacting would have proven the monkey's power to control him. Patience proved the monkey had no power at all. Consider your own situation. When someone provokes you and you spend hours mentally fighting them, who's really winning? They made one cutting remark and forgot about it immediately. You've been replaying it for 3 hours, running through responses, building elaborate scenarios of future confrontations. They're living their life. You're living their insult. The teaching here isn't about never setting boundaries. The patient buffalo could have moved to a different part of the forest, could have communicated displeasure without violence. Patience doesn't mean accepting abuse forever, but it points to something deeper about where the real battle happens. The monkey harassed the buffalo's body for maybe 20 minutes a day. The buffalo could have harassed his own mind for 24 hours a day, replaying the indignities, nursing grievances, planning retaliation. He chose not to. The external harassment was the monkey's action. The internal harassment would have been the buffalo's choice. There's a profound teaching here about mental freedom. Someone can act badly toward you. That's their karma, their action, their responsibility. But whether you mentally fight with them for hours afterward, that's your choice. The Buddha taught that we create suffering not just through external actions, but through how we hold things in our minds. Two people can experience the same provocation. One lets it pass like wind through trees. The other carries it for days, turning one moment of difficulty into continuous suffering. Same provocation, different relationship to it, different outcome. The patient buffalo had mastered this. Monkey pulls ears. The buffalo feels it, notes it, continues grazing. No story about it. No rehearsal of responses. No mental warfare extending one moment into hours. You might try this as practice. Next time someone provokes you, notice when the mental rehearsal begins. The moment you start crafting responses, imagining confrontations, replaying their words. See if you can catch it starting. Then ask, does this mental battle change anything about the actual situation? Does imagining the perfect comeback alter what they said? Does rehearsing the confrontation resolve anything? Or does it just extend their control over you from 30 seconds to 3 hours? The buffalo's wisdom was recognizing that some provocations don't deserve the dignity of internal response. not because you're weak, because they're not worth your mental energy. The monkey died because he fundamentally misread the situation. He saw patience and interpreted weakness. He saw restraint and interpreted inability. He never understood that the patient buffalo could have killed him at any moment. The choice not to was strength, not limitation. When you choose not to mentally fight with someone who provoked you, you're not being passive. You're refusing to let their behavior rent space in your head. There's a teaching in the Dhammapada, one of Buddhism's oldest and most revered texts. Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. The patient buffalo lived this teaching. Meeting harassment with violence would have been meeting ignorance with ignorance. Meeting it with patience was meeting ignorance with wisdom. And wisdom, the teaching says, always prevails. Not immediately, perhaps. Not in ways that feel satisfying to the angry mind, but inevitably. The monkey's own actions led to his death. The buffalo didn't need to retaliate. The monkey's misunderstanding of patience as weakness led him to provoke someone who had no such wisdom. Karma worked itself out without the buffalo needing to enforce it. This connects to another Buddhist teaching about non-interference. Sometimes the wisest action is no action. Sometimes things resolve themselves when you stop trying to control outcomes. The buffalo could have killed the monkey to teach him a lesson, but the monkey learned a much more permanent lesson by encountering natural consequences of his own behavior. You see this in your own life when you stop trying to make difficult people see what they're doing. Stop trying to make them understand, admit fault, acknowledge your perspective. Often, life teaches them far more effectively than your explanations ever could. The patient buffalo also understood something about dignity. His nobility came from his own nature, not from the monkey's recognition of it. The monkey could pull his ears until the end of time. It didn't change what the buffalo fundamentally was. Your worth doesn't depend on difficult people acknowledging it. Your dignity doesn't require their recognition. Your value exists independent of their opinion. This is hard to internalize because we're social creatures who want recognition. But Buddhism teaches that seeking validation from those who can't or won't give it creates suffering. The buffalo knew he was noble. The monkey's opinion was irrelevant. Can you know your own worth, independent of whether difficult people acknowledge it? There's also a teaching here about conserving energy. Mental warfare is exhausting. Continuous rehearsal of confrontations, constant planning of responses, endless replay of provocations. It drains you. The buffalo conserved his energy for what mattered: grazing, resting, living his life peacefully. He didn't waste it on mental battles with an ignorant monkey. Where is your energy going? How much gets consumed by mental fights with people who aren't even present? What could you do with that energy? if you freed it from rehearsing responses to people who provoked you last week, last month, last year. The Buddha's teaching on this is clear. You have limited energy and attention. Use it for what moves you toward freedom, not for what keeps you bound to reactivity. The patient buffalo also demonstrated something about compassion. He saw the monkey's behavior as arising from ignorance, not from malice. The monkey didn't understand, couldn't see clearly, was trapped in his own confused view of how the world worked. This is worth considering with difficult people in your life. They're not evil masterminds plotting your suffering. They're confused beings acting from their own pain, ignorance, or limitation. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it puts it in context. And sometimes that context makes it easier not to take it personally. The monkey pulled the buffalo's ears because the monkey was small and needed to feel powerful, not because the buffalo deserved harassment. When someone is difficult with you, it's usually about their own state of mind, not about your value. The story ends with the monkey's death, which might seem harsh, but it completes the teaching. Mistaking patience for weakness has consequences. The monkey learned fatally that not all calm beings are incapable of response. Some are calm because they're wise. Some are calm because they're restrained, and some are calm because they're simply waiting. The monkey couldn't tell the difference. His inability to recognize the source of patience killed him. There's a warning here about making assumptions. The patient buffalo wasn't weak. He was choosing patience. The ill-tempered buffalo wasn't strong. He was simply reactive. Strength and weakness aren't always what they appear to be. The teaching circles back to where it began. True strength is remaining unmoved by provocation. Not through suppression, that's just delayed reaction. Through clarity, seeing that someone else's behavior doesn't require your internal warfare. The buffalo grazed peacefully because he understood his own nature. Noble, powerful, complete. The monkey's harassment couldn't change that reality. You might recognize this in moments when you've successfully let something go. Someone was rude. You noted it and moved on. No hours of rehearsal, no mental warfare, just noting and releasing. That's the buffalo's teaching. That's the patience the Buddha practiced in this past life. Not dramatic forgiveness or forced compassion. Simply choosing not to engage the mental machinery that turns brief difficulty into extended suffering. The monkey is gone now, but his lesson remains. Patience isn't weakness. Restraint isn't inability. And sometimes the greatest power is the power to not react. In the next story, the scene shifts from external provocation to internal struggle. A student sits with a white cloth in his hands, repeating two words everyone thinks are meaningless. But those two words will unlock what years of complex study couldn't touch. The cloth was filthy. Kuapanthaka stared at it in his hands. This white cloth the Buddha had given him days ago, now stained grey-brown from continuous rubbing. Oil from his skin, dust from the air, the inevitable grime that accumulates on everything through contact and time. He'd been rubbing it for days while repeating two words: removing impurity, removing impurity. Everyone thought the Buddha had given him a cleaning task disguised as practice, a kind way to keep the hopeless student occupied while the real monks did real training. But Kuapanthaka wasn't cleaning anything. He was watching. The cloth had been pure white when he started. His hands had been clean, yet through continuous contact, the cloth had absorbed impurity. Gradually, inevitably, the white had turned to grey. And in that simple observation, everything shifted. If impurity could accumulate, it could be removed. If the cloth could become dirty, it could be cleaned. Nothing about the dirtiness was permanent or inherent to the cloth itself. His mind was like this cloth. All the confusion, the shame of being called stupid, the endless analysis of his own inadequacy, none of it was permanent. None of it was who he fundamentally was. It had accumulated through contact with discouragement, failure, harsh words. And what had accumulated could be removed. This is where most tellings of the Kuapanthaka story begin, with his breakthrough. But to understand why this simple insight shattered his mind open, you need to know what came before. His brother had given up on him that morning, not with cruelty, but with the resignation of someone stating obvious facts. "You're not suited for this life," his brother had said. "Monastic training requires memorization, study, understanding. You can't do any of it. Go back to lay life where these things don't matter." Kuapanthaka had tried to learn. For months he'd tried desperately. His brother would teach him a single verse, 4 lines, maybe 20 words total. Simple teachings that children could memorize. Kuapanthaka would repeat them carefully, concentrating with everything he had. Then his brother would ask him to recite it back. The words would vanish from his mind like water through sand, completely gone, not half remembered, erased. His brother tried different methods. Repetition, saying lines hundreds of times. Songs, turning verses into melodies. Images, connecting words to pictures. Nothing worked. The other monks noticed. Some pitied him. Others mocked openly. Why is he even here? He makes us all look bad. Send him away before he embarrasses the whole community. Kuapanthaka heard everything. Each comment confirmed what he already believed about himself. The overthinking became its own prison. He'd sit trying to memorize, but his mind would flood with thoughts about his inadequacy. Everyone knows I'm stupid. Why do I keep trying? What's wrong with my brain that I can't do what children do easily? The analysis consumed the mental space needed for actual learning. So when his brother finally told him to leave, Kuapantaka felt relief, mixed with crushing shame. Relief that the struggle could end. Shame that he'd failed at the one thing that mattered. He gathered his few possessions and walked toward the monastery gate. His mind churned. I'm not smart enough. I don't have what it takes. Everyone was right about me. The Buddha stood at the gate, watching him approach. Where are you going? The Buddha asked. Kuapantaka explained through shame and tears. His brother had dismissed him. He couldn't memorize anything. He was too stupid for the teachings. Better to leave before embarrassing himself further. The Buddha listened without interrupting. When Kuapantaka finished, the Buddha smiled with something that looked like recognition. Your brother teaches one kind of mind, the Buddha said, but there are many kinds of minds, many paths to understanding. Stay. I'll teach you myself. This itself is a teaching, the Buddha's skillful means, his ability to adapt methods to different students. Not everyone learns through memorization. Not everyone reaches understanding through intellectual study. Kuapantaka felt hope flicker, then doubt crushed it. If his own brother, patient and skilled, couldn't teach him, how could anyone succeed? The Buddha reached into his robe and pulled out a clean white cloth. Simple, ordinary, the kind used for cleaning. Take this, the Buddha said. Here is your practice. Rub this cloth while saying these words. Removing impurity. Removing impurity. Do this continuously, without stopping to analyze whether it's working. Kuapantaka stared at the cloth, confused. This wasn't a teaching. This wasn't a verse to memorize. This was just rubbing a cloth. That's all? He asked hesitantly. That's all, the Buddha confirmed. Rub the cloth. Say the words. Don't analyze. Just practice. Kuapantaka wanted to ask questions. How would this help? What was the point? Shouldn't he be studying actual teachings? But the Buddha's eyes held something that stopped the questions. An invitation to stop analyzing for once and simply do. Kuapantaka took the cloth and began. At first, it felt absurd. He sat in a corner of the monastery, rubbing this white cloth between his hands, repeating, removing impurity, over and over. Other monks walked past and stared. Some smirked. The stupid one had been given a cleaning task disguised as meditation. How appropriate. Kuapantaka felt familiar shame rise, but he kept rubbing. The Buddha had given him this instruction. He could at least try before giving up. Removing impurity. Removing impurity. His hands moved in steady rhythm. The cloth slid between his palms, soft and clean. Minutes passed. Then an hour. His mind tried to wander into familiar analysis. What was this accomplishing? How did rubbing cloth count as spiritual practice? Shouldn't he be learning something? But the instruction was simple. Rub the cloth. Say the words. Don't stop to analyze. So he didn't stop. Days passed this way. While other monks studied scriptures, Kupantaka rubbed his cloth. While they debated philosophy, he repeated his 2 words: removing impurity, removing impurity. The repetition became automatic, soothing. His hands knew the motion now. The words flowed without conscious effort. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about his stupidity, wasn't analyzing his inadequacy, wasn't measuring his failure. He was just rubbing a cloth. This is where the teaching becomes clear. Sometimes transformation comes not through understanding, but through bypass. The practice was so simple, it couldn't be overthought. Then one day, he noticed. The cloth was no longer white. His hands had been clean when he started. The cloth had been pristine, but after days of continuous rubbing, it had absorbed oil from his skin, dust from the air, the subtle grime that accumulates on everything through contact. The cloth was dirty, visibly, undeniably dirty. Kupantaka stopped and stared. Something shifted in his mind, a recognition so simple, it seemed impossible he'd missed it until now. The cloth had been pure, through contact, through time, through natural conditions. It had become impure. But this meant impurity wasn't permanent, wasn't inherent to the cloth. It was something that had accumulated through conditions. And what accumulates through conditions can be removed through conditions. Removing impurity, he whispered, looking at the cloth with new eyes. This is the teaching of the 3 marks that the Buddha taught throughout his life: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and the absence of a fixed self. The cloth wasn't inherently dirty. Dirtiness had arisen through conditions and would pass away through conditions. Nothing about it was permanent or fixed. His mind was like this. The confusion wasn't who he fundamentally was. The doubt, the shame, the endless analysis of inadequacy, these had accumulated through conditions. Harsh words, repeated failure, constant comparison. They weren't permanent features of his mind. They were temporary impurities that had gathered like dust. The insight deepened. He saw how greed creates impurity in the mind, how anger stains it, how ignorance obscures its natural clarity. Not as abstract concepts he'd failed to memorize, but as direct observation of how his own mind worked. He rubbed the cloth with new intensity, removing impurity, removing impurity. The practice intensified. Hours blurred together. His concentration deepened until nothing existed except the cloth, the motion, the words, and the mind, observing it all with perfect clarity. The overthinking that had plagued him his entire life, the constant analysis of his failures, the measuring of his inadequacy, simply stopped. Not because he'd reasoned his way out of it, not because he'd finally understood some complex teaching, but because he'd found a practice so simple, it bypassed analysis entirely. The concentration grew stronger. His mind, which couldn't hold a single verse through memorization, now held perfect stillness for hours. This reveals another teaching. The mind that seems incapable often just needs a different door. Kuapanthaka couldn't learn through intellectual understanding, but he could learn through direct experience, through practice, through observation. Weeks passed. The transformation became undeniable. Other monks noticed something had changed. The defeated slump in his shoulders had straightened. The confusion in his eyes had been replaced by quiet certainty. One morning during group meditation, Kuapanthaka sat completely still. His mind had reached a depth of concentration few ever achieve. In that stillness, the final impurities dissolved. Complete liberation, full awakening, the end of suffering. The student everyone had called hopeless had become enlightened. His brother heard the news and came running, disbelief clear on his face. "It's impossible," he said. "You couldn't memorize a single verse. How could you possibly have reached enlightenment?" The Buddha gathered the monks together. "Who is wiser?" he asked. "The one who memorizes 1,000 verses but doesn't practice them, or the one who learns a single truth and lives it completely?" This teaching appears in the Dhammapada, one of Buddhism's most important texts. Understanding isn't measured in verses memorized, but in transformation lived. Kuapanthaka stood before his brother, completely changed. The desperation to prove himself intelligent had vanished. The overthinking about capacity had dissolved. He'd found liberation not through complex understanding, but through simple, devoted practice. Later, the Buddha would declare Kuapanthaka foremost among disciples in creating mind-made manifestations. The one who couldn't remember basic verses could now perform feats of concentration that left scholars stunned. How does this teaching address overthinking your capacity? Kuapanthaka spent months analyzing why he couldn't learn. What was defective in his brain? Why did everyone else grasp easily what he struggled with? Was he fundamentally broken? The analysis itself prevented learning. Every moment spent measuring inadequacy was a moment not spent practicing. Every thought about stupidity reinforced the very limitation he feared. You recognize this pattern. How often do you avoid starting something because you're uncertain you're capable enough? How much time goes into analyzing whether you're smart enough, talented enough, prepared enough before you begin? The overthinking creates paralysis. You wait to understand everything before practicing anything. You need to know you'll succeed before you'll try. You analyze capacity endlessly instead of simply testing it. Kuapanthaka's transformation didn't come from finally understanding his capacity. It came from bypassing analysis entirely through simple practice. The Buddha gave him something so straightforward it couldn't be overthought. Rub a cloth. Say 2 words. Repeat. No complex theory to master first. No prerequisite knowledge required. No way to fail through insufficient understanding. Just practice. And through that practice, understanding arose naturally. Not abstract understanding from memorized verses, but direct insight from lived experience. The cloth became dirty. He observed this directly. From that simple observation, he understood impermanence, understood how defilements accumulate and can be removed, understood the nature of mind itself. Think about what you've been avoiding because you're not ready yet. The meditation practice you'll start once you've read enough books about meditation. The creative project you'll begin when you've studied enough technique. The difficult conversation you'll have after you've analyzed every possible outcome. The waiting for readiness is often just fear disguised as prudence. The analysis of capacity is often just a delay tactic. Kuapanthaka couldn't have analyzed his way to enlightenment. His mind didn't work that way. But he could rub a cloth. He could repeat 2 words. He could practice simply, continuously, without stopping to evaluate whether it was working. The practice itself created the capacity he thought he lacked. This doesn't mean understanding is worthless or study unnecessary, but it reveals that we often reverse the order. We think understanding must come first, then practice. Kupanthaka discovered the opposite. Practice first, continuously, simply. Understanding follows naturally from direct experience. The Buddha's skillful means shows throughout this story. He didn't give Kupanthaka more verses to memorize or better memorization techniques. He gave him a practice that matched how his mind actually worked. Different minds need different doors. The teaching that transforms one person might confuse another. The practice that seems simple might be exactly what unlocks understanding. The white cloth wasn't a lesser teaching because it was simple. It was the perfect teaching because it was accessible. You might notice this in your own life. The things you've learned most deeply often came not from complex theory but from simple practice repeated until understanding emerged. The sport or instrument where mastery came from doing, not from reading about doing. The skill where your hands learned before your mind understood. The insight that arrived not through analysis but through direct experience. Kuapanthaka's story carries one more teaching. Awakening is accessible to everyone, regardless of intellectual capacity. The path doesn't require genius, doesn't require scholarly ability, doesn't require perfect memory or quick understanding. It requires willingness to practice. The monk who couldn't memorize a single verse became one of the Buddha's greatest disciples, not despite his limitations, but through finding a practice that worked with how his mind actually functioned. What simple practice have you been dismissing because it seems too basic? What door have you been ignoring because you're looking for something more complex, more impressive, more worthy of your analytical mind? The freedom came from stopping analysis and starting action, not complicated action requiring extensive preparation. Simple action, repeated with dedication. Kuapanthaka rubbed a cloth until he saw the nature of reality. You might find your own white cloth in the practice you've been overlooking. The Buddha knew what Kuapanthaka needed. Not more theory, not better memorization techniques, not elaborate explanations. Just a cloth and 2 words. Simple practice defeats analysis. When you stop measuring and start moving, the capacity you're overthinking already exists. You discover it through action, not evaluation. But in the next clearing, a different lesson waits. A Brahmin stands bound with his student, and he's absolutely certain he's calculated the perfect escape. The student begs him not to act. The Brahmin knows better, and what happens next reveals what happens when we confuse our calculations with reality, when we ignore wise counsel because we're certain we've accounted for everything. Teacher, please don't. Vedaba barely heard his student's voice. His mind was too busy calculating, planning, ensuring every variable aligned with his prediction. They were bound with ropes in a forest clearing, surrounded by armed bandits, discussing whether to kill them quickly or slowly. But Vedaba had already mapped the way out. He knew a charm, ancient words that could call down treasure from the heavens when recited at the precise planetary conjunction. He'd verified it worked years ago. Gold, silver, jewels, all 7 precious things falling like rain. Tonight, the stars aligned perfectly. He would recite the charm. The treasure would dazzle the bandits. In the chaos of their greed, he and his student would slip away. The plan was flawless. Teacher, his student said again, more urgently, you can't predict what happens once that treasure appears. Please listen to me. But Vedaba had stopped listening the moment he'd started calculating. This is where the Jataka begins, with a teacher who possessed knowledge and a student who possessed wisdom, and the fatal gap between the two. The Buddha told this story to his monks to illustrate something crucial. Having wise counsel available means nothing if you ignore it. The student in this story was the Buddha himself in a past life, offering guidance that could have saved his teacher. Vedaba heard the words but dismissed them. He had logic on his side. The bandits were motivated by greed. Treasure would satisfy that greed. They wanted wealth without risk, leaving immediately with a fortune eliminated risk. Simple cause and effect. He'd thought it through completely. His student had tried to explain. There are too many variables you can't see. Treasure falling from the sky will attract attention far beyond this clearing. You're trying to control something too vast for any one person to manage. Vedaba smiled with the patience of someone explaining mathematics to a child. I understand your concern, he said, but I've calculated this carefully. The logic is clear. Teacher, I know what I'm doing. Those 5 words. How many disasters begin with absolute certainty? The lead bandit approached, curved blade, catching firelight. You're a Brahmin, he said. Brahmins know magic. Can you make us rich? Here was the moment. Vidarbha could have claimed ignorance, denied knowledge, refused cooperation. He met the bandit's eyes and spoke clearly. I know a charm that calls down the 7 precious things from the sky. Tonight, the stars align perfectly for it. His student closed his eyes in despair. The bandits erupted in excitement. They untied Vidarbha, but kept the student bound as insurance. They built up the fire. They waited for nightfall, weapons ready, greed sharpening their attention. If this is a trick, the leader promised, blade at Vidarbha's throat, you die very slowly. It's not a trick, Vidarbha assured him. In his mind, the plan unfolded with crystalline clarity. Recite the charm. Treasure falls. Bandits scramble to gather it. Escape in the chaos. 90% probability of success, he calculated. Maybe higher. His student made one final attempt. Teacher, this action will set in motion causes you cannot control. One condition leads to another, then another, spreading far beyond what you can predict or manage. This was the teaching the Buddha would later articulate fully. Dependent origination, the vast web of causes and conditions that connect everything. Pull one thread, and the whole web moves in ways you never intended. But Vidarbha wasn't interested in webs. He was interested in his calculation. Night fell. Stars wheeled into position. Vidarbha checked the sky carefully, confirming the conjunction. Everything aligned. Now, the bandit leader commanded. Vidarbha spoke the ancient words. For a moment, silence. The bandits tensed, fingers tightened on weapons. Then the sky opened. Gold coins fell like rain, glinting in firelight. Silver followed, ringing as it struck the ground. Jewels scattered across the clearing. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, catching flames and throwing colored light across stunned faces. Pearls bounced and rolled. Coral branches landed intact. Crystals buried themselves in soft earth. The treasure fell for a full minute, an impossible wealth accumulating in piles around them. The bandits stood frozen in awe, then broke into chaos, scrambling, shoving, laughing with disbelieving joy, gathering handfuls of gold, stuffing jewels into pockets, fighting over the largest gems. Vidarbha felt vindication flood through him. See, exactly as predicted, the treasure had them completely distracted. The leader cut the student free, not from mercy, but from sheer overwhelm. "You're free to go," he shouted, barely looking at them. "Take whatever you can carry. This is enough for everyone." Vidarbha helped his student to his feet. "You see?" he said quietly. "Everything worked exactly as I planned." His student didn't answer. He was staring at something beyond the clearing. Torches, moving through the trees. Many torches. The treasure falling from the sky had been visible for miles. The noise of coins raining down had carried through the forest. The colored light from jewels catching firelight had flashed like signals across the darkness. And now others were coming. A rival band of thieves emerged from the darkness, larger than the first group, better armed, and absolutely furious that someone else had found treasure. "That's ours," their leader roared. The first group looked up from their gathering, arms full of gold, faces hardening from joy to rage. "We found it," their leader said. "It's ours." "You found nothing," the newcomer spat. "That fell from the sky. Sky treasure belongs to whoever can hold it." Vidarbha's student grabbed his teacher's arm. "We need to run. Now." But Vidarbha stood frozen, watching his perfect calculation collapse. This wasn't supposed to happen. He'd accounted for the bandits' greed, for their distraction, for their willingness to let him go. He hadn't accounted for other thieves arriving. This is what the teaching of dependent origination reveals. Causes and conditions spread in networks too vast for individual minds to track. Vidarbha had calculated maybe 10 variables. Reality involved thousands. The two groups faced each other across the treasure. Weapons appeared. Swords, clubs, axes. The firelight caught blade edges, throwing sharp shadows. "Last chance," the newcomer said. "Walk away or die here." The first bandit leader laughed harshly. "We outnumber you. You walk away." "Actually," the newcomer said with a terrible smile, "you don't." More men emerged from the forest. The rival group had approached from multiple directions, while everyone was distracted by treasure. They'd surrounded the clearing. Numbers favored the newcomers decisively. The first group realized their positions simultaneously. Some dropped their treasure and ran. Others, too greedy to flee, stood their ground. Violence erupted instantly. Vidarbha's student pulled his teacher toward the trees, trying to escape while everyone fought. But the rival thieves had positioned men specifically to prevent escape. A blade flashed in the darkness. Vidarbha felt sharp, impossible cold in his chest. He looked down, confused, at the spreading red. His student was screaming something, but the words sounded distant. Vidarbha's mind, which had been so certain of its calculations, struggled to process this outcome. He'd predicted safety. He'd engineered escape. He'd controlled every variable he could see. But he'd been working with incomplete information, trying to manage a system far too complex for any single mind to predict. He fell. The forest floor was cold. Above him, men fought over treasure, while his life emptied onto the ground. His last thought was almost comic in its inadequacy. I miscalculated. The student survived by surrendering immediately, by not resisting when dragged along with surviving bandits, as the rival group claimed victory. Later, after managing to escape, he would find others from the original band who'd also survived. Ironically, they prospered from the treasure. Some had scattered far into the forest during the violence, unclaimed in the chaos. The survivors gathered what they could find and lived comfortably for years. Vidarbha's charm had worked perfectly. The treasure had fallen exactly as intended, but the outcome bore no resemblance to his prediction. This Jataka, number 48, carries several teachings that thread through all Buddhist traditions. First, the value of spiritual friendship. The Buddha emphasized this repeatedly, having wise friends, listening to wise counsel, remaining open to guidance, even when your own certainty feels absolute. Vidarbha had the Buddha himself as his student, offering wisdom, and dismissed it completely, not because the advice was unclear, because his own calculation felt more reliable than counsel. You do this too. Someone who loves you says, "I'm worried about this decision," and you explain why they don't understand. A friend says, "This feels risky," and you detail why you've got it covered. A teacher says, "Reconsider this approach," and you list why your logic is sound. Sometimes you're right and they're wrong. Sometimes their caution is excessive, their worry unfounded. But sometimes, and Vidarbha's death illustrates this precisely, your calculation is working with maybe 10% of relevant information, while they see something you can't. The teaching isn't that you should always defer to others' judgment. It's that absolute certainty in the face of wise caution deserves examination. Second, the teaching of dependent origination, the vast web of interconnected causes and conditions. Vidarbha thought in straight lines. Charm causes treasure. Treasure causes distraction. Distraction causes escape opportunity. Simple cause and effect. Reality works in networks. Charm causes treasure, which causes sound and light, which causes attention miles away, which causes rival thieves to investigate, which causes territorial conflict, which causes violence, which causes death. Each condition creates multiple new conditions. Each cause ripples outward in ways too complex for complete prediction. This doesn't mean planning is useless, but it means recognizing the fundamental limitation. You're trying to predict a system infinitely more complex than any model you can build. Think about the times you've overthought control, the relationship where you've calculated every conversation, predicted every response, engineered the perfect approach to avoid all conflict. Then they react in ways you never anticipated, or external circumstances shift everything, or your careful control creates the very distance you were trying to prevent. The work project, where you've anticipated every objection, prepared for every contingency, mapped every possible outcome. Then someone asks a question you never considered, or the project gets cancelled for reasons outside your analysis, or it succeeds in ways you didn't predict, creating consequences you never imagined. the financial decision where you've calculated every risk, protected against every downturn, built the perfect strategy. Then something happens you couldn't have predicted. A pandemic, a revolution, a technological shift that renders your entire analysis obsolete. Vidarbha wasn't stupid. His logic was internally consistent. His calculations were sound as far as they went. The problem was how far they went. The rival thieves existed, whether he knew about them or not. The treasure's visibility existed whether he'd considered it or not. The violence was inevitable whether he'd planned for it or not. Third, the teaching on heedlessness. The Buddha's last words were about diligence, about not being heedless. Heedlessness means acting without regard to consequences, ignoring wise counsel, being so certain of your own judgment that you dismiss all warning signs. Vidarbha was heedless, not through laziness or ignorance, through excessive confidence in his own calculation. His student, the Buddha in a past life, understood what Vidarbha didn't. Some situations are too complex to control. Some outcomes unfold through conditions you can't see, much less manage. The wisdom wasn't in calculating better. It was in recognizing the limits of calculation and acting with appropriate humility. How much mental energy do you spend trying to engineer perfect outcomes? The hours rehearsing conversations to prevent them going wrong. The elaborate planning to avoid all possible disasters. The constant adjustment trying to keep everything under control. How much of it actually controls outcomes? And how much just exhausts you while events unfold according to their own logic? Vidarbha's death wasn't failure of technique. It was the inevitable collision between certainty and complexity. But the story contains one more teaching, easy to miss. The student survived. The scattered treasure eventually helped others. What seemed like complete disaster contained seeds of benefit no one could have predicted. This points to something even deeper about trying to control outcomes. We don't just fail to predict bad results. We also fail to predict good ones. The treasure that killed Vidarbha became prosperity for survivors. The disaster from one perspective was fortune from another. Causes and conditions rippled outward in ways no one could have calculated. Even harm can become help through conditions you never foresaw. Even failure can seed success you never imagined. The web is too vast for judgment from any single position. What would it feel like to act decisively without needing to control every outcome? Not recklessly, but with recognition that perfect calculation is impossible. Vidarbha's mistake wasn't using the charm. It was being certain he knew what would happen next. His student's wisdom was simpler. Acknowledge uncertainty, listen to counsel, act with humility about what you can truly predict, adapt to what actually unfolds, rather than insisting reality match your calculation. You might notice this in your own overthinking. The paralysis that comes from trying to account for every variable before acting. The exhaustion of constant adjustment, trying to maintain control. The shock when outcomes diverge from careful plans. The freedom isn't in better calculation. It's in accepting that you're working with partial information in a complex system, and that's not a problem to solve, but a reality to work with. Plan, yes. Think ahead, certainly. Listen to wise counsel, absolutely. But hold your predictions lightly. Recognize that causes and conditions extend far beyond what you can see. Vedaba died certain. His student survived uncertain but adaptable. Which would you rather be? The treasure still glittered in the clearing when the violence finally ended. Gold and jewels scattered across ground soaked with blood. The survivors would gather it and prosper. The dead would fertilize the forest floor. And somewhere in the next teaching, a boat waits at a dock while a man makes breakfast. Another form of overthinking, another trap of calculation, another lesson in what happens when we confuse our plans with reality. The Buddha's final words to his disciples were simple. All conditioned things decay. Strive with diligence. Not strive when you're ready. Not strive when conditions are perfect. Just strive. Now, because death doesn't wait for your perfect timing. This teaching appears throughout Buddhist texts in different forms, but one story from the commentaries makes it visceral. A man, a river, a boat to the far shore, and delays that seemed so reasonable. The river wasn't just water. It represented the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that Buddhism teaches traps all beings in suffering. The shore where the man stood was the realm of constant dissatisfaction, of wanting, of never quite having enough. Across that river lay the far shore, liberation, the end of suffering, complete freedom from the cycle. The boat represented something extraordinarily rare, the opportunity to actually practice, to work toward freedom while conditions allow it. How rare. Remember the blind turtle, surfacing once every 100 years, finding a single floating ring in an ocean covering the entire earth. Being born with the capacity to understand and practice these teachings is rarer than that. The man in this story had achieved that rare birth. He had the mental faculties to understand, physical health to practice, access to the teachings. The boat had arrived. He woke to see it docked, exactly as announced. For weeks he'd known this chance was coming. He'd prepared, saved, planned, one crossing away from liberation. His stomach was empty. I should eat before going, he thought. The journey across is long. I need strength for what's ahead. This sounds reasonable. This is how we delay practice. I'll meditate tomorrow when I'm less tired. I'll start serious practice after I finish this project. I'll commit to the path when my life is more settled. Each excuse has logic. Each delay seems to optimize conditions for success. The man prepared breakfast slowly, methodically. If this was his last meal before crossing to liberation, why rush? The boat would wait. The captain had said afternoon. Hours remained. 60 minutes disappeared into eggs and tea and the comfortable ritual of eating. Full and warm, exhaustion hit him. The excitement had kept him awake most of the night, imagining his arrival on that far shore, the freedom waiting there. He looked toward the river. The boat sat peacefully. Other passengers boarding casually. No urgency. See, time remained. If I arrive exhausted, I won't be able to practice properly, he reasoned. Better to rest now and cross alert. Again, logical. Again, deadly. This is precisely how we waste precious human birth. We think we have time. We believe tomorrow will be better for practice than today. We trust that the opportunity will wait for our perfect readiness. But the Buddha taught clearly, death is unpredictable. You don't know if you have another day, another hour. The boat doesn't announce its exact departure. It just leaves. The man lay down for 20 minutes. Sleep took 2 hours because the body doesn't follow plans. When he woke, sun blazing overhead, panic spiked. He rushed to the window. Boat still there. Relief. See, his caution was warranted. But now midday heat bore down mercilessly. The thought of crossing under that burning sun, arriving drenched in sweat, seemed unreasonable. I could get sick, he thought. Better to wait until it cools. How many times have you delayed practice for comfort? I'll meditate after I'm more comfortable, less stressed, in better circumstances. The Buddha didn't teach waiting for ideal conditions. He taught practicing despite conditions. He taught urgency. His first teaching after enlightenment wasn't wait until you feel ready. It was, there is a path. Walk it now. The man waited for the heat to pass. An hour disappeared. Then another. Then he remembered his bundle. Had he packed everything needed for the far shore? Better check. Better organize properly. 40 minutes. Repacking what was already packed. Then the house. Should he secure it before leaving? Lock shutters, hide valuables, prepare for long absence? 30 minutes, making secure a house that held nothing worth protecting. Every decision was defensible. Every delay improved some minor variable. Together, catastrophic. When he finally stepped outside, bundle in hand, ready at last, the light had changed. The sun had moved further than he'd realized. He looked toward the river. The dock was empty. Not boat preparing to leave. Empty. Gone empty. He ran anyway, bundle bouncing against his back, breath tearing. Ran because accepting the truth meant accepting he'd destroyed his own liberation through breakfast and rest and heat avoidance and bundle checking and house securing. The dock was empty when he arrived, gasping, water showing wake marks, already fading. The boat was visible in the distance, small against the far shore. People on deck who'd boarded while he optimized conditions. People who'd crossed hungry, tired, hot, imperfect. People who were now on the shore of liberation while he remained trapped in suffering. A fisherman stood nearby, watching. He'd seen this before. "You missed it," the fisherman said. "When's the next one?" the man asked, though his voice already knew. Maybe a year, maybe longer, maybe never. This is the Buddhist teaching about precious human birth. You've been born as a human, already extraordinarily rare. You have mental capacity to understand these teachings. Rarer still. You have access to the path, almost impossibly rare. This combination might not come again for eons. The Buddha taught that after death, you might be reborn as an animal, a hungry ghost, in realms of suffering where practice is impossible. Human birth capable of practice might not return for countless lifetimes. The boat doesn't come regularly. When it arrives, you board. The man had spent his one chance on breakfast. "What should I have done?" he asked the fisherman. "Boarded hungry," the fisherman said simply. "Boarded tired, boarded hot, boarded imperfectly prepared, because boarding was the only thing that mattered." Think about how you delay your own practice. "I'll start meditating regularly once work settles down." Work never settles. The boat leaves while you're waiting for calm. "I'll commit to serious practice after I finish this degree, this project, this phase of life." Phases end. New phases begin. The boat doesn't wait for phase completion. "I'll deepen my practice when I'm older, when I have more time, when conditions are better." You don't know if you'll reach older. You don't know if you'll have time. You don't know if conditions will improve. The Buddha taught his disciples to contemplate death daily, not morbidly, but realistically. "I could die today," the contemplation goes. "Death could come this afternoon, tonight, in my sleep. What is essential? What actually matters?" This contemplation creates urgency without panic. It clarifies what's important versus what's merely comfortable. The man valued breakfast over liberation, valued rest over freedom, valued comfort over the end of suffering. Not because he was stupid, because he thought he had time. He didn't. None of us do. The fisherman had watched 20 boats come to that dock over 40 years. Every single time, someone missed it. Someone who thought they had time. Someone who optimized minor conditions while the major opportunity vanished. "The boat doesn't care about your reasons," the fisherman said. "It leaves on schedule. Always has. Always will." Buddhism teaches that all conditioned things are impermanent. Your body, your health, your mental clarity, your opportunity to practice, all temporary. The body you have right now that can sit in meditation, temporary. It will age, sicken, fail. The mind you have that can understand these teachings, temporary. Dementia could take it. Injury could damage it. Death will end it. The access you have to teachers, books, communities of practice, temporary. Circumstances change. Teachers die. Communities dissolve. This moment, right now, is the only guaranteed moment you have. The man would spend years on that shore of suffering, watching the far shore of liberation across water he'd never cross. Each morning he'd wake and think about that day, the boat that waited, the delays that seemed so reasonable, the breakfast that cost him everything. Not dramatic regret, quiet, permanent loss. The specific grief that comes from knowing you destroyed your own chance. I was going to board, he'd tell himself. I was just about to leave. But the boat was gone, and another might never come. This is why the Buddha's last words were, strive with diligence. Not strive when convenient, not strive when conditions align, not strive when you feel ready. Strive now, while you can, while the boat is here. The man's tragedy was accumulation. 10 minutes for breakfast, 60 actually, 20 minutes for rest, 120 actually, 30 waiting for heat to pass, 40 checking his bundle, 30 securing his house. None catastrophic alone, together fatal. Your delays accumulate the same way. I'll practice tomorrow becomes a week, becomes a month, becomes years, becomes a lifetime of I was going to. What separates those who cross from those who miss the boat? Not intelligence, not worthiness, not perfect preparation, just the willingness to board imperfect, uncomfortable, uncertain. The Buddha himself didn't wait for perfect conditions before leaving the palace. He had a newborn son, a loving wife, a kingdom to inherit, comfortable conditions by any measure. He left anyway, because he recognized that even comfort is temporary, that even palace walls can't protect against aging, sickness, death. He boarded the boat toward liberation despite imperfect timing. The teaching isn't that you must abandon everything. It's that you must practice now, with what you have, where you are. Not after you finish this phase of life. Not when you have more time. Not when you feel completely ready. Now, imperfectly, while the boat is here. The fisherman's teaching was simple. Better to wait on the boat than miss the boat. If you're uncertain about practice, start anyway. You can refine your technique aboard. You can deepen your understanding during the journey. You cannot board what's already gone. The sun set on the man's first evening of many on the wrong shore. The fisherman went home. The man sat alone, staring at water that held no boats. Across that water, the boat was docked on the far shore. Passengers had disembarked, stepping onto the land of liberation, beginning lives free from the cycle of suffering. The man could see it all from his dock, close enough to watch, too far to reach, a gap he'd created through breakfast. The Buddhist teaching here isn't subtle. It's direct, even harsh. You have this rare human birth right now. You have mental capacity right now. You have access to teachings right now. You don't know if you'll have any of this tomorrow. The boat is at the dock. Are you boarding, or are you making breakfast? What practice have you been delaying? What meditation have you postponed? What teaching have you shelved until the right time? The right time is the only time you're guaranteed. Now. The man learned this too late. The boat had gone. The rare opportunity had passed. The precious human birth would be spent on the wrong shore, watching liberation from a distance, living with permanent regret. You still have your boat. The question is whether you'll board it. In the next forest clearing, a different kind of urgency unfolds. Not the urgency of seizing opportunity, but the urgency of choosing integrity over safety. A hare faces fire and discovers that some moments demand courage that transcends all calculation of survival. The test came without warning. One moment the hare was grazing peacefully with his 3 companions, an otter, a jackal, and a monkey. The next moment, a poor Brahmin stood before them, travel-worn and hungry, asking for food. The hare had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Not this specific moment, not this particular Brahmin, but he'd made a vow long ago. If anyone comes to me in need, I will give freely whatever I have, even my own body. Now the vow would be tested. This story comes from the Sassa Jataka, number 316 in the ancient collection. The Buddha told it to show what generosity looks like when pushed to its absolute limit. The Brahmin was actually Sakka, king of the gods, disguised to test whether these 4 animals' practice of generosity was genuine or merely comfortable. He approached each in turn. The otter went to the river and returned with 7 fish. "I caught these today," he said. "Please, take what you need." The jackal scavenged and found a lizard and a pot of sour milk left by a farmer. "It's not much," he said, "but it's yours." The monkey climbed trees and gathered mangoes, rose apples, and fresh shoots. "Eat your fill," he offered. Each gave from what they had, real generosity, but within the boundaries of comfort and survival. Then the Brahmin approached the hare. The hare looked at him with complete clarity. No fish to catch. Hares don't fish. No meat to scavenge. He ate only grass. No fruit to gather. His legs couldn't climb trees. He had nothing to give except himself. Here's where you need to understand what happened in his mind. He didn't panic, didn't make excuses, didn't calculate the odds of survival or scheme for escape routes. He'd made a vow, and a vow means nothing if you only keep it when it's convenient. "I have only grass to offer," the hare said to the Brahmin, "and that won't satisfy your hunger. But I can give you my body as meat. Please, gather wood and build a fire. When the flames are ready, I will leap in." The Brahmin stared at him. "You would do this?" "I made a vow," the hare said simply. "Build the fire." Think about what's happening here. The hare isn't being impulsive or dramatic. He's made a calculation more profound than risk assessment. He's calculated that his integrity matters more than his survival. This is what Buddhism calls dana paramita, the perfection of generosity, one of the qualities those seeking full awakening develop over many lifetimes. Not giving what's easy to give, but giving even when it costs everything. The Brahmin gathered wood, stacked it carefully, built it into a pyre. The hare watched the preparations. He had time to reconsider, time to make excuses, to find loopholes in his vow, to choose survival over consistency. You know this moment from your own life. Not jumping into fire, but facing choices where keeping your word costs more than you expected, where living by your values requires sacrificing safety, comfort, or advantage. The moment when you realize that what you said you believed will now be tested. Your mind starts calculating immediately. Is this risk really necessary? Can I find another way? What are the odds this works out badly? Maybe there's a compromise that preserves both my values and my safety. This is overthinking, disguised as prudence. Not all risk calculation is overthinking. Sometimes caution prevents disaster. Sometimes analyzing danger is wisdom. But sometimes, and the hare understood this perfectly, calculating keeps you from the very actions that define who you are. The fire was ready, flames leaping, heat radiating, the wood crackling with genuine danger. This wasn't symbolic. This was a real fire that would cause real burning. The hare looked at it steadily. He didn't close his eyes or steel himself against fear. He felt the fear completely, acknowledged it, then chose to act anyway. This distinction matters. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the presence of fear when action aligns with your deepest values. The hare shook his fur to make sure no insects were hiding in it. Even in this moment, he thought of not harming others. Then he stepped back to get a running start. "I give this body freely," he said. "May this act of generosity serve all beings." And he leaped into the flames. The fire was cool. Not warm, not comfortable, completely cool, like leaping into moonlight. The flames that should have consumed him felt like gentle air against his fur. Saka had made the fire harmless through his divine power. The test was never about whether the hare would die. It was about whether he would leap, despite believing he would die. The Brahmin's disguise fell away. Saka stood revealed, radiant with divine light, awed by what he'd witnessed. "Why?" Saka asked. "Why would you give your life for a stranger?" The hare looked at him calmly. "Because I made a vow to practice generosity completely. A vow means nothing if I only keep it when it's safe." Saka was moved beyond words. He took mountain essence and drew the image of the hare on the moon, so that all beings, for all time, would remember this act of fearless generosity. When the Buddha finished telling this story, he revealed the teaching within it. "In that past life, I was the hare," he said, "the one who chose integrity over safety, who gave without calculating return." This matters deeply. The Buddha himself, in a past existence before enlightenment, practiced generosity so complete it included the willingness to die. Not because death is good, because some values matter more than survival. Think about how you calculate danger. That conversation you know you should have but keep postponing because you've imagined every way it could go wrong. The career change you've analyzed to death, listing every possible disaster, never quite ready, despite years of preparation. The relationship you won't pursue because you've calculated the probability of rejection. The risk is real. The danger exists. Your calculations aren't wrong. But sometimes the calculation itself becomes the cage. You're not being prudent. You're being paralyzed. The hare knew the fire would kill him. He wasn't naive, wasn't ignorant of danger. He'd calculated the risk completely and chosen to act anyway. Not because he wanted to die, because his vow mattered more than his fear. Buddhism teaches something subtle here about intention and action. The hare's intention wasn't self-destruction. It was keeping a sacred commitment to generosity. The same action, leaping into fire, could come from despair, from attention-seeking, from confusion. But it came from clarity, from knowing exactly what he valued and choosing it over safety. This is different from recklessness. Recklessness acts without seeing consequences. Courage acts despite seeing consequences. The hare saw the fire clearly, understood completely what he was doing, made the choice from wisdom, not impulse. You might notice this distinction in your own life. The times you've acted impulsively from anger or hurt, that's not courage. That's reaction. But the times you've done something difficult, knowing full well how hard it would be, choosing it anyway because it aligned with who you want to be, that's courage. The difference is consciousness, awareness, clear seeing. The hare didn't leap blindly. He leaped with eyes wide open. There's another teaching here about what generosity actually means. The other animals gave real gifts. Fish, food, fruit, valuable offerings. But they gave from surplus, from what they could afford to lose. The hare had nothing extra. Giving meant giving everything. Buddhism recognizes different levels of generosity. Giving what's easy to give is good. Giving what's difficult to give is better. Giving when it costs you everything. That's the perfection the Bodhisattva path requires. Not because suffering is good, because complete generosity transforms the giver. The hare wasn't trying to impress anyone, wasn't performing virtue. He'd made a private vow and kept it when tested, regardless of witnesses. His integrity existed independent of recognition. This connects to how you face your own fears. The difficult conversation, the risky career move, the vulnerable relationship, you've calculated all the ways they could fail. Every disaster scenario plays in your mind with vivid detail. The calculation never ends because there's always another variable to consider, another way things could go wrong, another reason to wait until you're more certain. But certainty never comes. The fire keeps burning, and the question remains, will you leap? The hare's teaching is that some leaps must be taken without guarantees. Not recklessly, not blindly, but despite knowing the full weight of what you're risking. When the Buddha told this story, he was teaching about the paramitas, the perfections that lead to full awakening. Generosity is the first of these, and the hare demonstrated it at its highest level. But embedded in the teaching is something deeper about fear and action. Fear is information. It tells you danger exists, but it doesn't tell you whether the danger is worth facing. That's a different calculation entirely. The hare's fear told him the fire would hurt. True information. But his values told him that keeping his vow mattered more than avoiding pain. Also true. The question isn't whether to feel fear. The question is whether fear gets to make all your decisions. You've probably noticed how fear-based calculation takes over. You want to speak honestly with someone, but your mind floods with scenarios of how it could damage the relationship. You want to pursue a dream, but your thoughts catalogue every way it could fail. You want to be vulnerable, but analysis shows all the ways that vulnerability could be weaponized. Every calculation is reasonable. Every fear is valid. And together they create a prison of perpetual safety and perpetual regret. The hare broke free by choosing a value stronger than fear. Not denying the danger. Not pretending the fire wasn't real. Acknowledging everything and leaping anyway. This is what the Buddhist path toward awakening requires. Not constant safety, but constant alignment with your deepest commitments. Sometimes that alignment is comfortable. Sometimes it requires everything you have. The teaching isn't that you should seek suffering or court danger. It's that when your values require action despite risk, calculation can't save you. Only courage can. The hare stood in those flames, cool as they turned out to be, and knew he'd chosen correctly, not because he survived, but because he'd honored what mattered most. Saka's recognition, the image on the moon, the eternal remembrance, these were consequences, not motivations. The hare would have leaped into burning flames just the same, even if no one ever knew. This is integrity. Doing what's right, regardless of outcome, regardless of recognition, regardless of whether the fire turns cool or burns. You face smaller fires constantly. The truth you know you should speak, but keep postponing. The change you know you should make, but keep analyzing. The risk you know you should take, but keep calculating. The calculation never finishes, because fear is endlessly creative. It will always find new dangers to consider, new disasters to prevent, new reasons to wait. At some point, you have to leap. Not blindly, not recklessly, but with full knowledge of the risk and full commitment to your values. The Buddha's teaching through this story is that the perfection of generosity requires exactly this: giving even when it costs everything, acting even when outcome is uncertain, choosing integrity over safety when you can't have both. The hare didn't know the fire would be cool. He leaped, believing it would burn. That's the teaching. Your fire might burn. The conversation might damage the relationship. The career change might fail. The vulnerability might be used against you. All possible. All real risks. But living by calculation alone guarantees a different kind of burning. The slow burn of knowing you never tried, never risked, never fully aligned your actions with your values. That's the fire that never stops. The hare's image remains on the moon, visible to all who look up. A reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear, but action despite it. That some values matter more than safety. That integrity tested is integrity proven. What fire are you calculating instead of leaping into? What risk are you endlessly analyzing instead of accepting? What matters more to you than safety? If only you could stop overthinking long enough to act. The hare knew. When the test came, he didn't hesitate. He'd already decided what kind of being he wanted to be. The fire was just confirmation. In the next teaching, the question shifts from courage in the face of danger to gratitude in the face of existence itself. A blind turtle surfaces once every 100 years. An ocean covers the earth. A single wooden ring floats somewhere on those waves. And the odds of that turtle finding that ring reveal exactly how precious this moment is. The Buddha asked his monks a question. Imagine, he said, that this entire earth were covered with water, one vast ocean, no land anywhere, waves stretching to every horizon. The monks listened, trying to picture it. Now imagine, the Buddha continued, that someone throws a wooden yoke into this ocean. A single ring, like those used to harness oxen, with one hole in the center. The winds blow it randomly, east to west, north to south, no pattern, no predictability. The monks nodded, following the image. And suppose, the Buddha said, there lives in this ocean a blind sea turtle. This turtle surfaces for air only once every 100 years. Just once per century, it rises from the depths to breathe. He paused, letting them absorb this. Now tell me, what are the chances that this blind turtle, surfacing randomly once per century, would put its head through the hole in that wooden yoke, drifting randomly across an ocean covering the entire earth? The monks looked at each other. The mathematics were impossible. The odds were so small, they barely existed. It would be an extraordinary coincidence, Lord, one monk finally said. Almost impossible. The Buddha nodded. It is exactly that unlikely, he said, and obtaining birth as a human being is even more rare than that. This teaching comes from the Chigala Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, one of the oldest Buddhist texts. The Buddha used this image to reveal something most people never grasp: the extraordinary rarity of the life you're living right now. Not life is precious as a greeting card sentiment, but precious as in statistically miraculous, so unlikely that the odds beggar comprehension. Think about what the image actually shows. An ocean covering the entire planet, millions upon millions of square miles of water, a single wooden ring blown randomly by winds across this vast expanse. A turtle that surfaces once per century, not once per year, not once per decade. Once every 100 years, it rises for a single breath before descending again into darkness. And this turtle is blind. It has no way to navigate toward the ring, no ability to search for it, no means of improving its odds through effort or intelligence. Pure chance, astronomical improbability, and even this impossibly rare event is more likely than being born human. The teaching addresses something specific about how you relate to existence. You complain, not constantly perhaps, but regularly, about your job, your body, your circumstances, your limitations. You analyze what's wrong with your life instead of recognizing what's extraordinary about having a life at all. A friend gets promoted and you spiral into comparison. Your body ages and you treat it like betrayal. Your income doesn't match your imagined lifestyle, and you calculate all the ways you've failed. Meanwhile, you're breathing without effort, thinking complex thoughts, reading symbols on a screen, and extracting meaning from them, making choices about how to spend your time. These aren't ordinary capabilities. They're the wooden ring. The Buddha taught that beings cycle through countless rebirths. Most of these rebirths occur in realms where practice is impossible, as animals driven purely by instinct, as beings in states of extreme suffering or extreme pleasure that prevent any reflection. Try to imagine existence without the capacity you currently have. Born as an ant, your entire existence would be chemical signals and programmed responses. No contemplation of meaning, no choice about your actions, pure instinct driving every movement until death. Born as a being in extreme suffering, every moment would be consumed by pain, so overwhelming that thought becomes impossible. No space for reflection, no capacity to practice, just raw sensation, obliterating everything else. Born as a being in extreme pleasure, the opposite problem. Why seek freedom from suffering when suffering never touches you? Why practice when everything feels perfect? Comfort becomes its own prison. Human birth is rare because it provides specific conditions. Enough suffering to motivate seeking freedom from suffering. Enough capacity to understand teachings and practice. Enough freedom to choose how to live. Not too much pleasure that you're complacent. Not too much pain that you can't function. Right in the middle, with just enough discomfort to seek and just enough capacity to practice. This balance is the wooden ring, and you are the blind turtle who surfaced exactly when and where it floated. Consider what had to align for you to exist. Your parents had to meet. Out of billions of people on Earth, these two specific humans had to encounter each other, had to feel attraction, had to conceive at the exact moment that created you, rather than a different genetic combination. Their parents had to meet, and their parents before them. Trace it back far enough, and you're looking at millions of precise encounters, each one necessary for your existence. One different choice by any ancestor, one different turn down a street, one different decision about where to live or work, and you wouldn't exist. Someone else might exist, but not you. That's just the biological lineage. The Buddha's teaching goes deeper. You could have been born as anything. In Buddhist cosmology, there are countless forms of existence. Most lack the capacity for practice, for understanding, for choosing freedom. Born without the mental capacity to understand cause and effect, you'd be trapped in patterns with no path out. Actions would lead to consequences, but you'd never grasp the connection. The cycle would continue, but awareness of the cycle would be impossible. But you weren't. You surfaced as human. Right now, with a mind that can read these words, contemplate their meaning, choose how to respond. The turtle found the ring. And what do you do with this impossibly rare occurrence? You overthink what's wrong with it. Your job isn't prestigious enough. Your body isn't attractive enough. Your circumstances aren't comfortable enough. Your life doesn't match the vision you had for yourself. All of which might be true, and all of which misses the scale of what you're dismissing as inadequate. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and you rage about disrespect for 20 minutes. You have a body that can drive, a mind that can navigate complex rules, the freedom to move through space at will, and you're angry about 30 seconds of inconvenience. Your phone loads slowly, and you feel genuine frustration. You're holding a device that connects you to the accumulated knowledge of human civilization, and you're upset it takes 5 seconds instead of 2. Your coffee isn't hot enough, your meeting runs long, your package arrives a day late. Real annoyances, genuine inconveniences, and also the complaints of a blind turtle standing on a wooden ring, treating miracles as mundane. The Buddha wasn't teaching that you should be happy with suffering or pretend problems don't exist. He spent his entire teaching career helping people address suffering skillfully. But he was teaching perspective. You're standing on the wooden ring complaining it's not a yacht. The monks who heard this teaching understood its implications. If human birth is this rare, if the conditions for practice are this unlikely to align, then wasting this opportunity is tragic beyond measure. Not wasting it through obvious self-destruction, wasting it through complaint, through treating existence as burden, through analyzing what's wrong, instead of recognizing what's extraordinary. Think about how you actually spend your mental energy. How much goes toward complaint versus appreciation? How much toward analyzing problems versus recognizing capacity? How much toward cataloging what's missing versus seeing what's present? You have 10 free minutes and spend them scrolling through images of other people's lives, feeling inadequate. 10 free minutes, time enough to sit quietly, to breathe consciously, to practice even briefly, and you spend it generating dissatisfaction. The blind turtle didn't surface looking for the ring. It surfaced for breath and found itself, by astronomical chance, exactly where the ring happened to be. You didn't choose to be born human. You didn't earn this capacity through prior effort in this lifetime. You surfaced and found yourself here, able to think, able to choose, able to practice. Pure extraordinary chance. The teaching has practical application beyond philosophy. When you're overwhelmed by what's wrong with your life, the turtle image provides scale. Yes, you have problems. Yes, circumstances could be better, and you have a mind capable of addressing problems, of changing circumstances, of practicing toward freedom. That capacity is the miracle. The problems are real but ordinary. The capacity is real and extraordinary. You've probably experienced moments when this clicked. Maybe after illness, when health returned and ordinary functioning felt like gift. Maybe after loss, when what you'd taken for granted revealed its value. Maybe in simple moments, breathing easily, thinking clearly, choosing freely, when the baseline miracle of existence became visible. Those moments don't require special circumstances. They require seeing clearly what's always true. The Buddha gave his monks this teaching to create what's called samvega, a word that doesn't translate cleanly into English. It combines urgency, wonder, and appropriate concern. urgency because this opportunity won't last. The turtle will descend again, and when you'll surface next, if ever, is unknowable. Wonder because the improbability of being here at all should take your breath away. Appropriate concern because wasting something this rare carries weight. Not fear that paralyzes, concern that motivates, that clarifies priorities, that cuts through the trivial to reveal what actually matters. This connects to earlier teachings about the boat you keep missing. The urgency isn't just about opportunities within this life. It's about this life itself being the opportunity. The turtle surfaced now. Will you spend this breath complaining about the quality of air, or will you use it to practice? The question sounds harsh until you hold it against the scale the Buddha provided. An ocean covering earth. One ring. 1 century between breaths. 1 blind turtle. And somehow, impossibly, you're here, reading this, capable of understanding it, free to choose what you do with the recognition. That's not ordinary. That's the ring beneath your feet. The teaching asks you to shift from complaint to reverence. Not fake reverence that denies difficulty. Genuine reverence that recognizes scale. Your job is difficult, and you have the capacity to work, to learn, to change careers if needed. Your body has limitations, and it functions well enough to move, sense, experience. Your circumstances aren't perfect, and you have the freedom to affect circumstances through choice and effort. The capacity is the treasure. The complaints miss it entirely. This doesn't mean you shouldn't address problems or work toward change. It means recognizing that having problems to address is itself a form of privilege. The turtle can surface and complain about the ring, or it can recognize that finding the ring at all was impossible luck and use this breath wisely. You're overthinking existence as burden when existence itself is the miracle you've been blind to. The Buddha ended this teaching with direct instruction. Therefore, monks, you should train diligently. Not be grateful in a vague way. Not appreciate what you have as abstract advice. Train, practice. Use this impossibly rare opportunity for its actual purpose, developing the qualities that lead to freedom from suffering. The wooden ring won't float here forever. The turtle won't surface again for another 100 years. This breath, this moment, this capacity, all temporary. All precious beyond measure. What would shift if you held your life against this scale? The annoying colleague, the imperfect body, the insufficient income. How would these complaints sound next to the image of a blind turtle surfacing once per century and finding, against all odds, the one ring floating on an ocean covering Earth? Not that the problems disappear, but they find proportion. You're the turtle who surfaced. The ring is here. The question isn't whether conditions are perfect. The question is whether you'll recognize the miracle you're standing on. In the final teaching, one more recognition waits. Not about preciousness found by chance, but about inherent nature recognized through courage. A queen stands before an assembly and proclaims something that silences all doubt, something that every being carries but few ever see. The lion's roar that ends all overthinking by revealing what was true before thought began. Every being carries within them the essence of awakening. Queen Srimala spoke these words before an assembly of monks, nobles, and seekers. Her voice was steady, clear, without hesitation. Though it may be hidden by ignorance, anger, and greed, it is never destroyed. Just as a priceless jewel may be covered in dust, the awakened nature is concealed, but never lost. The assembly sat in silence. What she was proclaiming contradicted what many believed, that awakening must be earned through lifetimes of effort, that most beings were fundamentally separated from enlightenment by vast distances of impurity and ignorance. But she continued without wavering. Some people may look at you and see only weakness, limitation, or ordinary worth. They value you for what you can provide, for your usefulness, for your accomplishments. But the truth is deeper. Within you is something invaluable, beyond measure. This is the lion's roar, the fearless proclamation of truth that cuts through doubt. The story comes from an important Mahayana text about Queen Srimala. She was the daughter of King Prasenajit, and she'd received teachings from the Buddha and attained deep realization. Now she stood before this assembly, proclaiming what she'd seen with absolute certainty. Not certainty built on faith or hope, certainty built on direct recognition. She'd looked within herself and seen what the Buddha had pointed to, the inherent capacity for complete awakening that exists in all beings, obscured but never absent, waiting not to be created but to be recognized. The teaching she proclaimed is called Buddha nature, the essence of awakening present in every being, regardless of their current state, regardless of how deeply buried beneath confusion and suffering. This is the fearless truth, the Buddha said after hearing her proclamation. All beings are destined for awakening. Their true value is immeasurable. Think about what this means for how you've been overthinking your life. You've spent hours measuring yourself against others, calculating whether you're smart enough, worthy enough, successful enough. The evaluation never concludes because you're looking for external proof of internal reality. You're trying to earn what you already possess. The jewel from the first story, the wooden ring from the seventh, these weren't metaphors for potential. They were metaphors for present reality obscured by ignorance. The poor man didn't need to develop the jewel's value. He needed to see that it was already sewn into his robe. The turtle didn't need to create the wooden ring. It needed to recognize it had surfaced exactly where the ring floated. You don't need to become worthy. You need to recognize the awakened nature you've been carrying all along. This isn't positive thinking or self-esteem psychology. It's a teaching about fundamental nature that every major Mahayana tradition upholds. Queen Srimala wasn't saying, believe in yourself, or you're special. She was pointing to something the Buddha had taught. All beings share the same essential nature, the same capacity for complete freedom, the same inherent awakening, obscured by temporary defilements. Temporary, that word matters. The ignorance that obscures Buddha nature isn't permanent. The confusion isn't who you fundamentally are. The overthinking, the doubt, the constant measuring, these are like dust on a jewel, not flaws in the jewel itself. Remember Kumapanthaka and the white cloth. He watched the cloth accumulate dirt and recognized that what accumulates can be removed. The cloth wasn't inherently dirty. His mind wasn't inherently confused. The confusion had accumulated through conditions, through harsh words, repeated failure, constant discouragement, but none of that touched his fundamental capacity for awakening. When he recognized this, the confusion dissolved, not through years of effort, but through seeing clearly what was always true. Queen Srimala's lion's roar proclaims this same recognition, not as theory, not as comfort, but as observable reality. Look at how all 8 stories have pointed to this same truth. The poor man searched for worthwhile carrying a jewel. The buffalo remained noble, regardless of the monkey's harassment. Kuapanthaka was never actually stupid. He just needed a practice that matched his mind. Vidarbha's death didn't diminish the truth that some conditions are beyond control. The man who missed the boat wasted precious time. The hare possessed courage that transcended calculation. The blind turtle surfaced at the exact moment the ring floated by. Every story reveals the same teaching from different angles. What you're seeking, you already have. What you're measuring for already exists. What you're overthinking obscures what's naturally present. This is why Queen Srimala's proclamation is called a lion's roar. A lion's roar doesn't ask permission, doesn't apologize, doesn't qualify itself with maybe, or possibly, or if you believe. It simply proclaims truth with complete confidence. Every being carries the essence of awakening, not might carry or could develop. Carries. Right now. Already. When you hear this teaching, really hear it, not just intellectually understand it, something fundamental shifts. The overthinking loses its urgency, not because your life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you stop looking for proof of worth in achievements, comparisons, and external validation. You recognize that what you've been frantically seeking was present all along, just obscured by the very activity of seeking. Think about how this applies to each form of overthinking these stories addressed. You overthink your worth because you believe worth must be earned. But Buddha nature can't be earned. It's already present. The measuring is unnecessary. You overthink reactions to difficult people because you believe their behavior diminishes you. But the buffalo's nobility existed independent of the monkey's actions. Their provocation can't touch your fundamental nature. You overthink your capacity because you believe intelligence or talent must be proven. But Kuapanthaka's awakening wasn't blocked by his apparent stupidity. It was blocked by the belief that he needed to be different than he was. You overthink control because you believe enough analysis equals safety. But Vidarbha's calculation couldn't account for the vast web of conditions. Some things unfold beyond individual management, and recognizing this is freedom, not failure. You overthink timing because you believe the perfect moment must be found. But the boat doesn't wait for perfect readiness. The opportunity is now, imperfect as the conditions might be. You overthink risk because you believe fear should prevent action. But the hare's courage came from values stronger than survival. Some things matter more than safety. You overthink existence as burden because you believe ordinary life is insufficient. But the turtle finding the ring reveals how extraordinary the ordinary actually is. This human birth is the miracle you've been blind to. And now, Queen Srimala's teaching brings all of this together. Every form of overthinking stems from one fundamental misunderstanding. You believe you're separate from awakening, that freedom is something distant you must journey toward through years of struggle. But the teaching says otherwise. Awakening isn't distant, it's obscured. The journey isn't towards something new, but toward recognizing what's been present all along. This is why the Buddha praised Queen Srimala's fearless proclamation. She understood and articulated what most people miss. You're not broken, you're not inadequate, you're not fundamentally flawed. You're a jewel covered in dust. A Buddha obscured by temporary confusion, awakening itself, wearing the costume of ignorance. The lion's roar proclaims this without apology, without qualification, without backing down before doubt. Within every being is Buddha, nature, never destroyed, only waiting to be seen. When this recognition lands, not as belief, but as direct seeing, the overthinking that has consumed so much energy simply stops. Not because you've solved all problems, not because life becomes easy, but because the fundamental question that drove the overthinking has dissolved. Am I enough? Loses meaning when you recognize you were never separate from enoughness. Will I succeed? Loses urgency when you see that what you're seeking is already present. What if I fail? Loses its terror when you understand that failure can't touch your fundamental nature. This is the freedom the Buddha taught. Not freedom from circumstances changing, but freedom from believing circumstances define you. Queen Srimala stood before that assembly and roared like a lion because she'd seen this directly. Not read about it, not believed it, not hoped for it. Seen it. And having seen it, she couldn't stay silent. The teaching had to be proclaimed, not for her benefit, but for everyone who still believed themselves separate from awakening, who still thought worth must be earned, who still measured themselves against impossible standards while carrying Buddha nature itself. You are that person. Reading these words, analyzing whether they're true, wondering if you can really trust this teaching, the very overthinking that keeps you from seeing what's already present. The invitation isn't to believe more strongly, it's to look directly. In this moment, right now, what exists before all the measuring begins, before the comparison, before the evaluation, before the calculation of worth. That's what Queen Srimala pointed to. That's the lion's roar. Not something you create through effort, not something you achieve through years of practice. Something already present, already complete, already free, just waiting for recognition. The Buddha confirmed her teaching because she'd articulated what he'd been showing all along through every story, every metaphor, every teaching. The jewel is already sewn in your robe. The wooden ring is already beneath your feet. The awakened nature is already your fundamental reality. Stop searching and see. Stop measuring and recognize. Stop overthinking and know what was true before thought began. This is the lion's roar that ends all doubt. Not because you've proven yourself worthy, not because you've finally achieved enough, but because you've recognized what was always true, what could never be taken away, what you've been carrying through every moment of searching and doubt. The essence of awakening, Buddha nature itself, already present, already complete, already free, just obscured by the very overthinking that promised to reveal it. Queen Srimala's teaching is the culmination of everything you've encountered in these 8 stories. Every tale pointed here, to this recognition, this roar, this fearless proclamation of what you are beneath all the confusion. The poor man discovered his jewel and walked away wealthy, not because the jewel suddenly appeared, but because he finally saw what had been there all along. You stand at the same moment of recognition. The jewel is already sewn into your robe. The question isn't whether it exists. The question is whether you'll stop searching long enough to see it. This is the teaching. This is the lion's roar. This is what ends all overthinking, not by solving every problem, but by revealing the truth that makes the fundamental question dissolve. You were never separate from what you've been seeking. You were never inadequate, never broken, never fundamentally flawed. Just a jewel covered in dust, a Buddha wearing the costume of confusion, awakening itself, temporarily unable to see its own nature. But now you've heard the roar. Now you know what the 8 stories revealed. Now the only question is whether you'll recognize what was always true, or continue searching for what you already have. The lion has roared. Can you hear it? The stories are complete. 8 mirrors held up to show where your mind traps itself and how to step free. You've seen the jewels sewn into the robe, the monkey on the buffalo's back, the white cloth that revealed everything, the treasure that fell from the sky, the boat that left the dock, the fire that wouldn't burn, the blind turtle finding the ring, the queen's fearless roar. Each one showed the same truth from different angles. What you've been frantically seeking already exists. The worth you measure for, the peace you calculate toward, the freedom you postpone, all present now, obscured only by the searching itself. The overthinking hasn't protected you. It's exhausted you. But now you've seen an alternative. Not thinking better thoughts, but recognizing what exists before thought begins. The jewel is already sewn into your robe. The wooden ring is already beneath your feet. The awakened nature the Queen proclaimed, already yours, already complete, already free. Nothing you do can create it. Nothing you've done has destroyed it. It simply waits, patient, as the jewel traveled with that poor man for years, for you to stop measuring long enough to see. The stories haven't given you something new. They've revealed what you've always carried. May you recognize it. May you trust it. May you stop searching and simply see. The lion has roared. You've always been the jewel.